How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Zayin, Daf 7 of Masechta BavaBasra. Where are we starting? What did we get up to? Okay. And today's an interesting Daf. Alright, let's get started. Okay, we're going to start in Daf Vav Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Hanu Bei Trey. So there are 2 people. Rashi says that they were brothers who divided up their father's estate, and there was a 2-story house, and there was a bottom apartment and an upper apartment. So Shimon took the bottom apartment, Reuven took the upper apartment. So Shimon was in the bottom apartment, Reuven was in the top apartment. Isber Tatoi. Now a very inconvenient scenario developed, which was the building started sinking. And Be'etzim Shimon, who was on the first floor, is in a shver matzav. The house is poshet sinking into the ground, and it's getting very, very difficult for him to get in and out of his house. So now, Isber, so it's sinking, Tatoi, the bottom level. So Omar le Tatoi liloi, so Shimon says to Reuven, who, Reuven is, he everything's fine for him. He's not underground because he's got the upper level. Tovin Ivnai. So Shimon says to Reuven, hey, the building is sinking. Let's knock it down and rebuild it. You know what Reuven says? Reuven says, life is good for me. I'm not on the bottom floor. My apartment's not underground. My apartment is still fine. I don't want to knock down the house right now. I don't need that headache. Amalei. So the Agos Bach changes the words around, and Amalei. What is it? Avnaye ono. So Shimon says, "Look, I'll deal with the entire expense." Right? Shimon, you won't have to pay for it. I'll do it. I'll knock it down. I'll rebuild it. I just, need you to be on board. Omar leis li duchte lemederba. So Reuven says, yeah, but where am I going to go? So Omar le ana ogelach duchte. Shimon says, I'll rent you a place. Omar le lo tarachna. Reuven says, I don't know. It's a schlep. I'd rather not. So Shimon then says, but lo kamizdarli. Shimon says, but living in an apartment that is sinking is extremely inconvenient. So shufa kreisech v'ul v'shufa kreisech ufuk. Reuven says, I don't know. You can crawl into it. If you need to. Rashi says, bend over, do a shtickle limbo. It's inconvenient. I get it, but you can make it work. So Amr Rav Chame says, Rav Chame bedino kamake. So Rav Chame says, look, at the end of the day, Reuven doesn't have to go through the inconvenience of construction. He's saying, look, Shimon, you can technically still get into your house. I really don't want the headache of construction. But that's so long as Reuven's floor is not within 10 tvachim of the ground. But if Reuven's floor is within 10 tvachim of the ground, well, at that point, Shimon can now say to Reuven, Lemata miyud reshusa didihu. Look, within 10 tvachim of the ground, that is my space. And you are now in my space, and my space is not indebted to you. And now, we need to break it, we need to knock it down, and I wouldn't be surprised if Shimon at this point was less forthcoming. But anyways, at that point, the house must be knocked down and rebuilt. And that's so long as they haven't made some kind of tanai in advance that, if the house sinks, then they'll knock it down and rebuild it. But if they had in advance made some kind of condition like this, so sasre uvanu, then they would already knock down the house and rebuild it. So when they would make a t'nai that, hey, if the house is sinking, we'll knock it down and rebuild it, at what point would it be considered sinking enough that they would knock it down and rebuild it? The rabbi said before Rabbi, Mishmei de Marzutra Beder of Nachman, in the name of Marzutra Beder of Nachman, who said in the name of Nachman, like that which we're going to learn in only another 3 months. Rumo kachatzi orko v'kachatzi rochba, that its height is 50% of its length plus 50% of its width is the height. And we learned that out, Rashi points out, we learned it out from the Heichel that its length was 40, its width was 20, and its height was 30. So half of 40 is 20, half of 20 is 10. Wait, what? Half of 40 is 20, half of 20 is 10, so 20 and 10 is 30. Okay. So if I don't even know what that means. I guess maybe if like the floor of Reuven's apartment gets like within that range, then that means that it's too low. Yeah, maybe that's what it means. Amarlu Rabba, but Rabba said to them, however, Lava mina lechu, didn't I say to you, Lo tislu be bukesrike be Rav Nachman, don't hang empty pictures on Rav Nachman. Sounds like basically Rav Nachman didn't say that about the half length, half width plus thingy. Hacham Rav Nachman, this is what Rav Nachman said, Ki the daire inshe, it's like the people live. How do people live? Like if people go into a house with like a machosein bundle of like grain or something, and a bundle of long reeds, and they start like shaking it around in all sorts of directions, including up, and that's how high the I guess Shimon's floor needs to be off the ground. Lower than that, Reuven's floor needs to be off the ground. Lower than that, it would be considered too low, and it's sinking, and they would knock it down and rebuild it. Okay, so that was a scenario where Rav Chama says, look, Shimon, I know it's inconvenient for you, but the fact of the matter is, Reuven doesn't need to move out, and we're going to see more incidents like this. There was a fellow, Dava Boni Ashisa Achore Kabe Dechavre. All right. So Shimon has got a house, and his house, Baruch Hashem, has a window. Reuven builds a wall blocking Shimon's window, blocking his light. So now, there was a certain fellow, Dava Boni Ashisa Achore Kavi Dechavre. There was so Reuven was building his wall, and it was going to block sunlight from going through Shimon's window. So Shimon says to Reuven, "Hey, Reuven, you're blocking the light from being able to come into my house." Reuven says, "Don't worry about it, Shimon. How about this? Socharna loch hacha v'avidna loch kavi le'el me'ashisoy. I will fill in your windows with all sorts of junk, and then I will extend the wall vertically and build you new windows above my wall so that sunlight will be able to get through in the higher up windows." Amalei Shimon says, "Kamar as le lashi soip. You're going to weaken my wall by doing construction on it." Right, meaning the windows in there, and you're going to fill it in, and then start building stuff on top. It's going to weaken the wall. Amarle. So Reuven suggested what apparently I guess would be what he considered at least to be a better solution. So how about this? I will knock down the wall, demolish the wall until the windows, until beneath the windows. And then I will build up from there so that it will be a solid wall instead of like a filled-in window. And then I will, build up this wall and build you windows above where my wall ends. Amalei, Shimon says, Ashiso mitato atika umileel chadato lo kaima. Shimon says, a wall that the bottom part of it is old and the top part of it is new, it won't stand. Amalei, so Reuven says, fine. So Saina lo ad le'ara uvanina lo ve'avidna lo kave begava. So Reuven suggests, fine, you know what? I will demolish the wall all the way down to the ground and build you a brand new wall from the ground up and then include the windows above my wall. Amalei, Shimon says, Chada ashisa chadata b'chulei beisa atika lo kaima. Shimon says, when you have one brand new wall and the rest of the house is old walls, it doesn't work like that. I guess it won't last well. Amalei, so Reuven says, all right, sasanu l'chulei beisa vanina loch kave b'vinyana. So Reuven says, all right, fine. How about this? I will knock down your entire house and I'll build you a brand new house with windows above my wall. Shimon says, where am I going to go? I got nowhere to go. I'm not okay. That's not an option for me. I got nowhere to go. Reuven says, I will rent for you a place to live. Shimon says, I don't need the headache. And once again, Rav Chama says, look, at the end of the day, Shimon is entitled to say, I want my sunlight. Right? There's a concept Rashi mentions in sort of the next scenario about chezkas orah shel shalosh shanim. Keilu, I assume it's the same idea here. Shimon basically, he has a chazaka that he's entitled to this light. He's a chezkas orah. It's an interesting concept. A chazaka that he's entitled to light. And therefore, Shimon's entitled to his light, and if he says, Reuven, look, you can't build, you can't build. Hainuach, but shouldn't this essentially be the same thing as the previous scenario, where we say, look, Reuven is entitled to live on the top floor, and if he doesn't want to leave, he doesn't have to leave. So it sounds like this is the same thing. Shimon's entitled to his light, and he doesn't have to, he doesn't have to budge. So Vasulamali, why do I need the additional case? So Kamasman is teaching us even though Shimon only uses this house for storing wood and grain and straw, things like that. But still, even so, if he wants his light, he can keep his light. Hanu Bey Trey Ache de Palge Bade Adode. So Reuven and Shimon, their father passed away, and they divided up the estate. And they divided up in a peculiar way. Shimon got the mansion, Reuven got the field. Sounds like Shimon got the better deal, right? Shimon gets the mansion, Reuven gets a field. Okay. So again, Anu Beitrei Ache, there were these two brothers, that they divided up their father's estate. Chad Matye Asplida, Shimon got a mansion, V'chad Matye Tarbitza, and Reuven got a field. Ozalahu de Matye Tarbitza, V'karboni Ashisa Apuma de Asplida. Reuven, who got the field, then went and he builds a wall on his field that blocks sunlight from getting into Shimon's mansion. And the thing here is that this is new to both of them, right? I mean, it was their father's estate. All of a sudden now it's theirs. Shimon, whose mansion it is, doesn't have a chazaka, a chezkas oira, doesn't have a chazaka on this light for 3 years. He just got it. And Reuven, so Shimon says to Reuven, Kama aplas olai, you are blocking my sunlight. Amalei bididi kabanina. And Reuven says, look, I built the wall on my field, on my property. And you don't have a chezkas ora. You don't have a chazaka that you've been enjoying the life for 3 years. You just got the mansion. Amar Rav Chama bidin ka amalei. And says Rav Chama, Reuven's taka right. Shimon doesn't have a chezkas oira, and Reuven is building the wall on his own property, and he's allowed to. Omerle Ravina l'Rav Ashi. Now says Ravina to Rav Ashi, Ravina is sort of challenging this premise and saying, wait, Reuven should not be allowed to build that wall. Ma'ishno me'odetanya. Why should this scenario where Shimon is insisting that he has a right to the light and we are denying him that right to the light, why should that be any different from the following scenario? Shnei achin shechelku, that you have two brothers that divided up their father's estate. Echad me'en notal stei kerim, ve'echad me'en notal stei lovin. Shimon took the vineyard, and Reuven took the stockyard, where they grow wheat. Okay. Okay, Shimon took the vineyard, Reuven took the stockyard. Now, of course, the vineyard is more valuable. A vineyard is more valuable than a stockyard, right? Just like the mansion is more valuable than the field, the vineyard is more valuable than the stockyard. So echad men notal stay kerim, ve'echad men notal stay lavon. Yesh lo lebal hakerim dalit amis bistei lavon. So Shimon, who's got the vineyard, also has a right to 4 amis in Reuven's stockyard, where he can use it for plowing his vineyard, because they would use cows and oxen, and therefore he had the right, because I guess the vineyard and the stockyard were right next to each other. So Shimon has the right to 4 amis in Reuven's stockyard in order to for his oxen to go and to plow. Sha'amanas kain chelku, because this is how they divided it up. We'll get into more detail about that in just a second. But this is how they divided it up. So why don't we say that just like Shimon has the right to 4 amis in the stockyard, because that's how he's going to plow his vineyard. So Shimon also, in our case, has the right to the light, because that's necessary for his mansion. That's how they divided it up. So Omar Lei, so Rav Ashi responds to Ravina, Hosam, by the vineyard and the stockyard, de alu le'adade. Well, there they had kind of worked it out. It's clear that a vineyard is more valuable than a stockyard. So therefore, when they divided up the estate, it was understood that Shimon was getting the more valuable real estate. Therefore, he would make it up by paying Reuven money, right? So he'd make up the difference in money, and together with the vineyard comes all the things necessary for the vineyard, including the 4 amis that will be necessary for plowing it. But it says Ravina, aval hachomai, and what? By our case of the mansion and the field, dilu alu laadode b'chi b'shuftini askinon da'shakel esplida v'ashakel tabitza v'lo alu laadode. I don't understand. And what about our case with the mansion and the field? Are we talking about idiots over here? But is Reuven an idiot? Shimon says, okay, I'll take the mansion and you get the field. Fair? Reuven's like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. No, Reuven's not an idiot. Clearly, it must have been the same thing over here as well. That it's obvious that Shimon is getting, the more valuable real estate. So he's going to have to make up with that to Reuven with money, and they're going to work it out with each other. But when Shimon gets the mansion, he gets the mansion together with all of its fixings, including the sunlight. So Amar Leis Rav Ashi responds to Ravina, Nihi de'alu la'adade dmei livnei kshur v'hudre. Look, when they kind of made a cheshbon of balancing things out, that was in terms of the physical real estate, things like bricks and beams and other ornaments and things. That's when they kind of were dividing things up that way. But me'avira lo alu la'adade, but me'avira light be'etzem was not included in the cheshbon, and therefore Shimon doesn't have that inherent right to the light, and therefore Reuven can build his wall. V'leimele me'ikara asplida palgos li hashta mashviz li idrona. But again, Ravina pushes further. He says, but can't Shimon make the argument that, look, when we were dividing up our father's estate, I took a mansion. Now I don't have a mansion, now I have a dungeon. I have a dark room. This isn't what I signed up for. Rav Shimi bar Ashi says, Rav Shimi bar Ashi, look, Shma ba'alma palagle. Look, there was no guarantees to this mansion of all the features that it would have. He signed up for a mansion, he got a mansion. No, nobody guaranteed that there would be light in the mansion. A mansion is still a mansion, even if it doesn't have light. Like we learned the other day with a stay alavon. Or was it a stay alavon or I think a stay elon, with the river that dried up. As we're going to see a Gemara that I imagine is going to be familiar to us. Milotani, after all, don't we learn in the Brisa, Omer, base core offer ani mocher lecha, that if Shimon says to Reuven, I'm selling you a base core of earth, of land, even though it's only half of a core, higio, it's still a valid sale. Shalom mocher lo ela shma, base core. What he sold is the name, as long as it's called a base core. We talked about Martha's Vineyard, doesn't have a vineyard. Los Angeles doesn't have angels. So as long as it's called base core, that's enough, and it's a valid sale. Pardes ani mochelach. I'm selling you a pomegranate orchard. Even though it doesn't have pomegranates, higio, it's a valid sale. He sold him something that's called a pardes rimonim, a pomegranate orchard, even though it might happen to not have pomegranates. Kermani mocher lecha. I'm selling you a vineyard. Even though there might not be vines there right now, higio, it's still a valid sale. Shalo machalo ela shma. You sold him a vineyard, right? Even though there might not actually be vines right now, but it's the name that was sold. As long as it's actually called a vineyard. So therefore, here also, right, says Ravashi, or no, this was Rav Shimi bar Ashi. Says, here also, Shimon got a mansion. He got a mansion. There might not be light in it, but it is a mansion. So, midami, to which Ravina says, I don't know about that. Hasa matzi amarle, when Shimon is selling, let's say, a vineyard to Ruvain, he gets matzi amarle mochel lokeach. Shimon could say to Ruvain, Shma zavine loch. I'm selling you a name. I'm selling you something that's called a vineyard, but I'm not guaranteeing that there's actually vines in there. But over here, nobody's selling anything. Reuven and Shimon are dividing up their father's estate. Their father left them estate, and they're dividing it up fairly. So Shimon can say to Reuven, palgi, when I took my share of our father's estate, it was dida'irna bekiechi didora avahason. I took the mansion with the understanding that I would be able to live in it like our father lived in it, with light. Amrulei, Mayunuka, Umakshisha, Beder Rav Chizda. Mayunuka, Makshisha, the sons of Rav Chizda said to Rav Ashi, Nardoi l'taimayu, that the Nardeans, Rav Chama being one of them, are consistent with their reasoning. The Amar of Nachman Amar Shmuel. So Nachman Amar Shmuel was also from Narda. So Rav Chama was from Narda. Shmuel was from Narda. Ha'achin shechelku, that when brothers divide up an estate, ein loen lo derech zelze, v'lo chlone zelze, v'lo sulmo zelze, v'lo amas hamayim zelze, v'zoru boen shalochis kivuas hein. Says of Nachman and Shmuel, again, Achin Shechelku, that when brothers divide up an estate, ein loen lo derech zelze, let's say there were two fields, one in the north and one in the south, and their father would always walk through the southern one to get to the northern one. When the father passes away and Reuven and Shimon divide up the estate, if Shimon has Reuven has the southern field, Reuven doesn't need to allow Shimon to walk through it to get to his field in the north, even though the father would always do it. In our case, the winders, Shimon can't say to Reuven, look, don't build a wall on your field. The window, right? There's no guarantee of windows between, right, when the estate is divided. If Shimon gets the chotzer and the bottom floor of the house, he doesn't need to allow Reuven to put a ladder in there to get to his floor and the top floor. And back to the fields, if there's a stream, Shimon doesn't need to allow Reuven to have the stream flow through his field to get to his field. And be very careful with these halachos kvuos, because they're very important halachos. Rav, Agosabach changes this to Rav. Omar yesh lohen. Rav says that their brothers do have these rights, but Shmuel and Rav Chama would say that they don't. There was a document of Yisomim. So let's say Shimon had lent Reuven $1,000. Shimon then passed away, and his heirs, his orphans, inherited the document that says that they are entitled to collect $1,000 from Reuven. So these Yisomim had this document that says that Reuven owed their father Shimon and now them $1,000. Dinofik ale tavra, but Reuven provides a receipt that apparently he had paid their father back. Rav Chome, so it says Rav Chome, agbuye lo magbinon le, umikra lo karinon le. So we don't collect from we don't collect with the orphan's document because let's go weiter. But we also won't tear it up. Agbuye lo magbinon le, we won't collect with their document because Reuven provided a receipt. Mikra lo karinon le, but at the same time we don't tear up the orphan's document. Because when they become adults, maybe as adults they will be able to find some kind of a proof that will prove that that Reuven's receipt is fraudulent, and then they will be able to collect the loan. So don't tear up the document. Says what is the halacha? So Ravina says to him, that in all of the above cases where Rav Chama kept on saying like like in the first case when Shimon's house was sinking and Rav Chama says, look, Reuven is allowed to live in the top floor, he doesn't have to agree to knock it down. Right? All those scenarios where Rav Chama was like, look, I understand this case is uncomfortable, but the other guy doesn't actually have to do anything. So the law is like Rav Chama in all these scenarios. Levar mitavra, except for this case, when Rav Chama said that they can't collect with the document. We also don't tear up their document. This I don't agree with, because if Reuven is providing a receipt with witnesses on it, decided b'shakre lo machzikinon. It's a very slippery slope if we allow ourselves to distrust a document that has witnesses on it, right? That's like Kodesh HaKadoshim, right? If Reuven provides a receipt with witnesses on it, our whole system is based on trusting witnesses. And if we all of a sudden are not trusting witnesses, that is a slippery slope. Marzuch Breder of Mari Omar says of Marzuch Breder of Mari Behanami Ochsak Rav Chama, that no, here Oichet Talacha is like Rav Chama, because the problem is that this receipt that Reuven is coming up with is inherently dubious, is inherently suspicious. The im isa detavim ayu, because if it was really a very a great document, he should have shown it when Shimon was still alive. From the fact that Reuven didn't pull out this document when Shimon was still alive, and he only pulled it out once Shimon was dead, makes it suspicious to begin with. I saw it in a note in the article that it could be talking about like a scenario where, like, when Shimon was still alive, Reuven didn't, there were like witnesses that said, hey, Reuven, prove that you paid, and he wasn't able to prove it, and only now he's proving it afterwards, after Shimon's already dead. it's very suspicious, which is why in this case we are saying, hey, don't tear up the document of the Yisomim. Maybe when they get older, they will find some interesting information. Says the Mishnah, Kofin also livnos beis shar v'deles lechotzer. So a person who lives in a chotzer, okay, we know about chatzeres from Masechta Eruvin, right? Houses open up into a chotzer. So everybody in the chotzer needs to contribute to build a beis shar, a gatehouse for the watchman to sit in, v'deles, and a door, the chotzer, for the courtyard. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, lo kol hachatzeres u'is lebeis shar. Not every single courtyard deserves a gatehouse. Kofnos livnos lo'ir choma v'delasayim v'riach, and everybody who lives in the city must contribute to build a wall and double doors and cross beams for protection. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer says, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, lo kol ha'yaris v'rius l'choma. Not all cities are fit for walls. How long does a person need to be living in a city to be considered one of the people of that city and that he needs to contribute to these funds? Yud Beis Chodesh, if he's lived there for 12 months. Kana ba Beis Dira, if he buys property in the city, a house in the city, well then, he's immediately considered at that point like one of the people in the city, and he has to contribute to these funds. Does this imply that a gatehouse is a good thing? Right? We're saying that a person who lives in a chotzer needs to contribute to the gatehouse. Is that therefore considered a good thing? There's a certain chassid that Eliyahu Hanavi would speak to him. That's a pretty high level. Avad beis shar v'sula mishtoi b'idei. And this chassid made a beis shar, a gatehouse in front of his chotzer, and Eliyahu Hanavi stopped talking to him. Because if you have a beis shar, well then the people, the aniyim, are kind of stuck outside of the beis shar. Let's go back there for a second. Lokasha migavoy or mibaroi. So it depends if the gatehouse is outside of the chotzer or inside of the chotzer. Kilu, is it outside of the chotzer and therefore there's a gatehouse and there's a door on the, well, that's also going to be another nafkamina. Let's say you have a gatehouse and there's a door to get into the gatehouse and then another door to get into the chotzer. If that's the case, then the aniyim who are calling out for tzedakah have to stand like twice removed from the chotzer, and nobody's gonna hear them, nobody's gonna help them. But if the gatehouse is inside of the chotzer, or maybe it was taka fakert. What does Rashi say? Migavoy l'chotzer griusa hu lefisha del l'chotzer na'ova ani tzoy guvesa shar b'shebifnim. Mibaroi enu mavsik b'fanav sharei nichnas. Oh, fakert. If the gatehouse is in the outside of the wall, so then the aniyim could go into the gatehouse, and then there's only the door of the chotzer that's between them. Whereas if the gatehouse is inside, well then you have the door of the chotzer plus the door of the gatehouse, and nobody's going to hear them. Okay, so lokasha migavoy hamibaroi. So if the gatehouse is inside, well that's a problem. That's why Eliyahu Hanavi stopped talking to this chassid. But if the gatehouse is outside, well then the aniyim can go into the gatehouse and cry out. Alternatively, no, both scenarios are talking about where the gatehouse is on the outside, but it depends if there's a door on the gatehouse or not. If there's a door, well then they can't get into the gatehouse, and there's still going to be, right, then there's the door of the gatehouse plus the door of the chotzer, so that's going to be a problem. But if there's no door on the gatehouse, well then they can go into the gatehouse, and that's okay. Alternatively, both scenarios are where there's a door on the gatehouse. It's no problem. So I don't really understand what this means. It depends if there's a lock on the door or not. So the simple explanation would be if there's no lock on the door, they can go into the gatehouse, and therefore there's no problem. If there's a lock on the door, they can't get in. It is a problem. But apparently this is a lock that like the key is in it already. So if the key's in it already, so what's the problem? Alternatively, so or you could say that in both cases there was a lock, but if the lock is on the outside and the key is in the lock, well then they can get into the door. But if the lock is on the inside, well then they won't be able to get in. Okay, so basically, if the gatehouse was preventing the aniyim from being able to ask for tzedakah, well, then that would be a problem. But so long as that's not the case, then it's okay. Kofin also livnos beis shar v'dels lachotzer. Okay, so the Mishnah had said that we compel everybody in the chotzer to contribute to building the gatehouse and the door. Tanya, we learned in the Brayso of Shimon ben Gamliel, says of Shimon ben Gamliel, lo kol chatzeres uyus lebeis shar. Not all chotzers need a gatehouse. Remember Masechta Eruvin? Remember a mavui? So you have Rishus Harabim. From Rishus Harabim you go into the mavui. Now in the mavui has different chatzeros opening up into it. So let's say you have a chatzer on the left and a chotzer on the right, and you can go further into the mavui, and there's another chotzer on the left and another chotzer on the right. So only the chotzeros that are closer to Rishus Harabim need a gatehouse so that people won't, peek into them. But the ones further away, nobody's going that far into the mavui to peek. Okay, so again, so the chotzer that's closer to the Rishus Harabim needs a beis shar. But if it's not next to Rishus Harabim, if it's further into the mavui, doesn't require a gatehouse. Rabbanon zimnin dedacha kebnei Rishus Harabim va'adul va'asu. Whereas the Rabbanon say no, all of them need a gatehouse because sometimes people push their way through and get to the end of the mavui and peek in and stuff. So for that scenario, we still have a gatehouse for those chutzers as well. That was Daf Zayin of Masechta BavaBasra. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.